Hello, YouTubers. I was going to do a video on another topic other than the 144,000. Actually, I produced a video probably a couple of years ago on that topic, and unfortunately, the color was a bit off, and I was trying to fix it using Google enhancements, so-called, and something went terribly wrong. I don't know. I ended up cropping the video to 5 seconds, so it was worthless. I tossed it in the trash bin. I'm sorry if you commented on it, but my apologies. So it seems to be a controversial topic for sure, and so I thought I would address it with this video. Oftentimes you hear uninformed people say, oh, Jehovah's Witnesses, they think that only 144,000 people are going to be saved. And, that causes quite a shock, consternation to people that don't know anything about the topic. But it's unfortunate that there is, frankly, so much ignorance in this area. You know, bluntly, most people, everything they know about the Bible is wrong. Virtually everything is wrong in some way, twisted and tweaked and distorted. And this goes back to the time when 300 years into the Christian era, Constantine injected himself into the so-called Christian congregation at the time to be the arbiter of what was the truth regarding the identity of Jesus, that he was going to be the arbiter to settle this issue, and he weighed in favor of Jesus being God. And really, he made that form of Christianity, even though there were only about, of the total population in the Roman jurisdiction, only about 10% even claimed to be Christian. He made that the state religion. And so ever since then, what has been taught and passed off as Christianity has been under the domination and influence of an empire. And of course, the Romans, when Christianity became the state religion, they brought in a lot of their pagan ideas and doctrines and beliefs and so forth. It's where all the so-called holidays have come from. The Trinity goes back to ancient Egypt and Babylon. I've done a video on that. And the belief in the immortal soul goes way back. It's not a biblical teaching. The Bible is very simple. You die, you're dead. Your thoughts cease. The hope of the Scriptures is a resurrection. And God originally intended for humans to live on this earth. Death came about as a result of disobedience. He intends to remedy that, to bring the dead back to life on earth. The vast majority of people who have lived and died will be resurrected here on the earth. It's a simple Bible teaching. And yet people, it's a novel thing when you explain it to them, that God is going to make this earth, not some other, he's not going to make a new planet somewhere. This earth will be developed into a paradise under the rule of God's kingdom, and the dead will come back to life and be re-educated, rehabilitated, without Satan's influence, without a political system dominating them, without a false religious system twisting our minds and deceiving us. So billions of people are going to be saved. Even atheists and devil worshippers, they were misled. God is going to bring them back to life. And the wicked receive a resurrection of judgment, like on probation, parole. If they don't obey the kingdom at that time, under optimal conditions, they go back to death. That's the second death, permanent death. So who are these 144,000? Glad you asked. They are those who are called to be with Christ in heaven and to rule with him in his kingdom. Revelation 20th chapter says, happy and holy is anyone having part in the first resurrection. Over these, the second death has no authority, and they will be kings and priests with Christ for 1,000 years. So it's really a wonderful provision of Jehovah to have a kingdom, a rulership, even though it's a heavenly kingdom. It will be ruled by individuals who used to be human and who used to be sinful humans. Everyone except Christ. All of the 144,000 came from sinful humanity who've had all the problems common to humankind. And so they will be able to deal with them in an understanding way, in a compassionate way, knowing that they were there at one time. But as the scripture I quoted regarding the first resurrection, obviously as there is a first resurrection, there's a second resurrection. That's the earthly resurrection. Well, there's only two places in Revelation where it refers to these 144,000. But it's interesting that it was alluded to in the scriptures that there was a set number. For example, in the 17th chapter of John, Jesus is praying and he referred to the full number of the men that you've given me. And Paul referred to the full number of people, the nations coming in to make up Israel. When the full number comes in, Israel is complete. Well, he wasn't talking about the literal nation of Israel. And that's another point of misunderstanding with people, because in the 7th chapter of Revelation, one of the places it refers to these 144,000, it casts them in the setting of coming from Israel, 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes of Israel. And so people say, oh, Jehovah's Witnesses are wrong about that. It's talking about Jews that become Christians and they're going to go to heaven. Right before Jesus was put to death, he came to Jerusalem the final time for the Passover when he was arrested, and he pronounced judgment upon Israel. And he said, woe to you, the kingdom is going to be taken from you and given to a nation producing its fruit. The kingdom of God is going to be taken from Israel and given to a nation. Which nation was that? The nation that Jesus instituted. Instead of the 12 tribes of Israel, it was founded upon the 12 apostles of Christ. They are the Israel of God, not the fleshly Israel. You know, a lot of Paul's letters, he had to fight against this tendency. It's amazing that the Jewish Christians still felt that it was necessary to follow the law. And Paul had to fight this idea among the Christians in the first century. Whereas the evangelicals today argue the same thing, that God is still dealing with Israel. They have no understanding of the book of Romans, for example, or the book of Galatians, where Paul explained that if you belong to Christ, you are the seed of Abraham. Gentile, Jew, it doesn't matter. The seed of Abraham are those who are anointed by God. And in the 6th chapter of that book of Galatians, he said, peace be upon you, even the Israel of God. He wasn't talking about the Israel that Jesus said the kingdom was going to be taken from them. The Christian congregation, the congregation of the firstborn, those who are born again, that's the Israel of God. The letter of James, written by Jesus' half-brother, expressed his greetings. Greetings to the 12 tribes that are scattered about. He's not greeting the fleshly Israelites. It's an expression referring to those anointed brothers and sisters make up the spiritual Israel of God. And so Revelation, the 7th chapter, is just emphasizing that point, that this Israel of God is a complete organization. It's structured, 144,000. The 14th chapter of Revelation is the other place in Revelation where it mentions the 144,000. And it's interesting. It comes, the verse after, in the 13th chapter, refers to those with the 666 mark on their forehead or hand. That's the doomed. But then John saw this vision of 144,000 standing with the Lamb upon Mount Zion, a symbol for the heavenly kingdom. And it said they have the name of his Father and the name of the Lamb written on their foreheads, in contrast to those who have the mark of the beast. And it's interesting that it mentions two names, the name of the Father and the name of the Son, the Lamb in this instance. Two different names, two different individuals. Whereas the devil has used all of his wicked power to confuse the relationship of Jehovah and Jesus. They're all one and the same. The Son wasn't born. He didn't have a beginning. He's God. There is no... The latest con that's being run on the gullible believers is that Jehovah changed his name to Jesus, which is, of course, nonsense. And Revelation 14:1 indicates that there is the name of God, which in English pronunciation we're familiar with is Jehovah. And of course, Jehovah's Witnesses are exclusively attached to that name and have made that name known throughout the world in hundreds of languages. So this pretty much rules out anyone who is a Trinitarian from being a member of this exclusive 144,000. They could not possibly belong to Jehovah and Jesus because they deny that Jehovah has a son. Jesus is God. There is no father-son relationship in the mind of a Trinitarian. They'll talk about, oh yeah, I believe in the Father, Son, but they don't believe in a father-son relationship. That aside, I don't want to get into a Trinitarian thing. I know I'll get a bunch of comments here. Oh, I said John 1:1, you guys got your own Bible, and Jesus said, I is, I am, and that settles it. So, okay. But for those of you who have a reasoning mind and would like to understand a little more about why God called 144,000 to this position in heaven. Actually, they're called chosen ones, right? You don't volunteer to be one of them. God does the choosing. So Paul said it does not matter about the one wishing or the one running the race. I want to be one. It matters about God who does the choosing. Actually, Paul said God chooses the weak and foolish things of the world in order to put the strong and the wise things to shame. But knowing the Father and the Son, that's the key, isn't it? So what are the requirements to be one of these chosen ones? Well, Jesus explained it in the 3rd chapter of John when he was speaking to this Pharisee, Nicodemus. And he said, you must be born again to enter into the kingdom. And Nicodemus was perplexed. How can a man be born again? He can't enter into his mother's womb a second time, can he? Of course not. And Jesus said, you must be born from the water and from the Spirit. What did Jesus mean? Well, you have to be baptized as a Christian. So that rules out anyone who lived before Jesus being part of this 144,000. And being born from the Spirit means being anointed. Jesus himself was born again. He was the very first person who was born again. Obviously, people don't understand what it means to be born again. You know, there was a fad among the evangelicals, 20 years ago. Yeah, I was born again. I gave up liquor and women. I'm born again. I believe. But that's not necessarily what it means to be born again. To be born from the Spirit means that God begets one, adopts one, to become a spiritual son of his. Because humans, by nature, have no soul or spirit that's going to depart death to be with God. It's a special creation Paul referred to it as the new creation. And Jesus was the very first of this new creation. Now, this whole idea that Jesus was God on earth is ridiculous. Jehovah's Witnesses deny the deity of Jesus. Well, Jesus was a deity, but when he was on the earth, he was a man, nothing more. I'm going to let the phone ring. Hope it doesn't get on the video here. I don't like to pause and restart, but let's go back to the Garden of Eden. And when God made Adam and Eve, he blessed the seventh day and made it sacred. And he says he's been resting from his work. We know what happened, though. Satan entered in, misled Eve and then Adam, brought death upon the human race. For God had intended for them to subdue the earth, to fill the earth with righteous offspring. And now his purpose, it looks like it's thwarted. His creation is in a death state, and God can't just turn around and create two new humans. He's resting. He would have violated his Sabbath. The devil was trying to accuse him of something, right? He's lying. He's holding something back. If God would have violated his Sabbath, Satan would have had a point. He lied. He said he was resting. Now he turned around, created two new Adam and Eves to populate the earth. So what God intended to do at that point was to provide a seed, a ransomer, to repurchase mankind. He couldn't just let us off the hook. It's true, you and I didn't sin originally. We had no choice. We were born as sinners. But still, that's the reality. We were born as sinners. How can God give us an exemption from the punishment of death? To balance God's judgment, if another perfect man would give his life to God and remain perfect, then God would accept that as our payment, so we could avoid the penalty of death. Where would God get another perfect man without violating his Sabbath? His firstborn son in heaven was willing to allow because angels, which Christ, all the sons of God are angels. All the angels are sons of God. People think that angels are not sons of God. They are sons of God, powerful spirits, godlike ones, made in God's image. The same as Adam and Eve were made in God's image. So in that respect, as Paul said, we're just a little lower than the angels. So because the man that became Jesus already existed, God took his life force miraculously and encoded it into a reproductive sperm cell and impregnated the Virgin Mary. And as the angel said, who announced his birth, Holy Spirit would overshadow her and cause this to happen. So the firstborn Son of God no longer existed in heaven. He emptied himself, Paul wrote, and came in fashion as a man. So he had to be the equivalent of what Adam was before he sinned. Nothing more, not a God-man, not a God in the flesh, God incarnate. In the 15th chapter of 1 Corinthians, Paul referred to the first man made of the dust of the earth. That's what it says in Genesis. God created Adam out of the dust and blew into his nostrils the breath of life. The second man is out of heaven. Who is the second man? That is Jesus. In what sense is he a second man? The second perfect man. And Paul went on to refer to him as the last Adam, because he is the last perfect man that God will ever create. But he didn't create him from the dust of the earth. That would have violated his Sabbath. He transferred his willing Son from heaven, and now he had a perfect man on the earth who was in a position, and he was related to humankind. He was grafted in, you might say, to the dying human race, and apparently Jehovah's perfection overshadowed Mary's inherent imperfection so that a perfect Son of God could be born. And that's the perfect life that Jesus took all the way to the stake when he was executed. And God then received that life as payment for ours. That's the ransom sacrifice. So that buys back all of mankind from the grave. But okay, so that would have fixed the problem that started in Eden, right? Why take 144,000 to heaven to be with Christ? Back in Eden, Satan the devil called into question God's character. God is holding something back. You can't be trusted. That's why he's telling you not to eat from this tree. He knows if you eat from it, you'll be like him. You'll know good and bad. And he can't have that. He can't have any real freedom among his creatures. He has to keep you under wraps. And Jehovah brought the issue out a little more from the devil in the instance of Job. And he said, what's your issue? Let's get it out here. And I said, okay. He said, Job, you think he's your servant? Take all that stuff away from him. You'll see he just worships you because what he can get out of you. Take it all away. You'll see he'll curse you to your very face. So basically the devil is saying that God's creation will not love him out of pure love because he's worthy of our adoration. God has to bribe us. He has to suppress us somehow and keep us in place because otherwise God's not really all that great, right? So Jehovah intends to lay waste to this lie for all time in front of all the angels that are living and whatever creatures come into existence in far-flung corners of the universe. This will be a legal precedent. And Jehovah will never, ever again allow a rebellion in his heavenly realm or in any realm. So it's not just a matter of these 144,000 going to heaven. I mean, there are who knows how many angels already in heaven, and most of them have been faithful to God. This new creation is something extraordinary. And Jesus indicated what it was when he said, God has given the Son of Man life in himself. And the Son of Man gives life to those whom he chooses to have life in themselves, I should say. Having life in oneself is not just being alive, like we're alive, but we do not have life in ourselves, according to what Jesus meant by that. Having life in oneself means having immortality, not being dependent upon God. It means being indestructible. And before Jesus came to the earth, the only person who was immortal was Jehovah God himself. He gave immortality to Jesus. That's what Jesus said. The Father has given it to the Son. But it wasn't conferred upon him until his resurrection. Otherwise, he couldn't have died. And he didn't just pretend to be dead. He was dead and totally dependent upon God to bring him back from the dead, which of course he did. And upon his resurrection, Paul said he's immortal, indestructible, and death is master over him no more. So Jesus has this life in himself. He doesn't need Jehovah anymore to give him life. And the 144,000 having life in themselves will no longer need Jehovah to sustain them. Now think about that. Humans can live forever on this earth. God intended it, but they will always be dependent upon God to sustain their life, to keep the sun burning, and whatever he has to do to keep it from burning out. Rain and food and all, we're very fragile, mortal creatures, even though you can live forever. The angels are mortal, and some of them are going to die. The angels that rebelled, they're going to not exist, so they're not immortal. No angels are. The new creation will have immortality conferred upon them, indestructibility and incorruptibleness. So what does that prove? Well, Revelation depicts them throwing their crowns before Jehovah. They worship God and the Lamb, and they will always be loyal to God, even though they do not need him to give them life. And that settles the issue. Because Jehovah will reveal himself to them. As Jesus said, only the Son knows the Father. And the Father knows the Son, and to whomever he is willing to reveal it. So the 144,000 will know Jehovah completely. And they will, knowing him that way, they will always, always, always be loyal to him. Not because they have to, because they're afraid that he'll put them to death. He won't be able to. They won't need him to live. But they will always be loyal to him because they love him, and he will love them. That is why Jesus, like I say, he's the firstborn among many brothers. Paul referred to them. So these other brothers make up this new creation will have the same life that Jesus Christ has. And they will be as close to Jehovah as you can get. And Paul said that in the first chapter of Hebrews that Jesus was the exact image and representation of God. He's not God. He's exactly like him. He's the exact image. And the 144,000 are exactly as Christ. So Jehovah has this intimate group of worshipers who are exactly like him, and that's what the chosen ones will inherit. That's a special privilege, and they will be used by Jehovah in a special way, as I said, to rule with Christ for that 1,000 years, to rehabilitate mankind, and then at the end of the 1,000 years, they'll take part in destroying Satan and the demons and sending them into oblivion. So anyway, if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them. You can post them here as comments, but or you can send me an email. But I'm not. Let's avoid this. Running off the rails with John 1:1 and all that goofy stuff. Okay. Well, thank you.